Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Diner and the Fab Feral 5 Test Kitchen. You know, there's nothing that says comfort food and family dinner more than meatloaf. Pull up a stool and let's make 3 versions of this classic dish. Today's going to be fun. We have 3 takes on that family favorite, meatloaf. The first one is a classic meatloaf using fresh breadcrumbs. The second one is a recent viral sensation meatloaf using stovetop stuffing as the binder. And the third one is a family favorite or a tradition of ours. We've been making this in my family for probably 50, 60, 70 years, something like that. And that's using oatmeal as the binder. Now I have my ingredients spread out in front of me here. I'll be making mini-sized meatloaves today because, again, as I say very often, I'm only one person and I'll be eating this for probably the next week, these 3 variations. But in the description, I'll put the full recipe for a full batch, full loaf-sized meatloaf for anybody who's interested. Now I've separated my ground beef into 3 different loaf pans. As I said, I'm making half versions of each of these recipes today. And so one called for 3/4 of a pound of beef and the other called for 1 pound. And so I've got those measured appropriately. So the next thing I need to do is make my breadcrumbs for the classic meatloaf. So I've got just some French bread here, some French bread that I've had in the fridge for a little while. It's a little bit dry, but that's perfect. Exactly what I want for using as breadcrumbs. And I'm just giving these a rough chop that'll help them work their way around inside of this chopper. Honestly, that'll probably be enough. I'll be using 1 cup of breadcrumbs for the classic meatloaf. But I'll go ahead and chop these others because, hey, you can never have too many breadcrumbs in your life. Always something to use those for. So with this second batch of breadcrumbs, a little Fab Feral 5 kitchen tip for you. Spread these out on a sheet pan, put them in an oven at, 200 degrees, and just let them dry out, and then they'll store in a Ziploc bag for a lot longer, and then you can use those whenever you want to. Okay, my fillers are ready to go. I have my French bread fresh chopped. That'll go in the classic meatloaf. I've got the stovetop stuffing mix. I'll talk a little bit more about that once we get to that version for the viral meatloaf. And then for the traditional family meatloaf, my own family meatloaf, I've got a 1/3 cup of quick oats, oatmeal. And so the next step is to start blending these ingredients together. Now I'm using my hands as mixers today. It's the best tool for making meatloaf. And I'll start with the classic meatloaf. So we're going to put in 1 pound of ground beef, 1 egg, 1 cup of the breadcrumbs. Not exact, but close. About an 1/8 cup of finely diced onion. 1 tablespoon of fresh chopped Italian parsley. A 1/2 teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of Italian seasoning. A few grinds of black pepper. And a 1/4 cup of buttermilk. Now we blend. Again, I want this to be fully incorporated, but I do not want to smash this together very hard. That's why hands are the best tools for this. I want to make sure that the breadcrumbs get incorporated throughout the meat. Let that buttermilk attack the breadcrumbs. The seasoning mix throughout. And there it is, mixed out. Classic meatloaf. This will go right back into this loaf pan. I want to make sure that it's all the way down inside of the corners on the bottom, so I am going to push a little bit. So now let's move on to the second version, which is the viral meatloaf. Right back into the bowl. One egg. 3 ounces of the stovetop stuffing mix. About a quarter cup of water. And give this a mix. Now we don't need a lot of extra spices in this because there's spice inside of that stuffing mix. You can already feel the texture difference between fresh breadcrumbs and these little hard nuggets that are the stuffing mix. That's partially why the water went in, to help hydrate the dried bread in the stuffing mix. Now you can also use a broth if you'd prefer rather than water. Give it a little more flavor, maybe a beef broth, even a chicken broth, whatever you have in the fridge maybe. But going with the recipe that I found online. Okay, going to bring my loaf pan back over, my second loaf pan. You can see this is there's a lot of meat here that's going into these loaf pans. I'll definitely need to have a pan underneath for any drippings that come out. I have that ready to go. Okay, version number 2 is done. Now let's move to my family recipe. So this is where I have 3/4 of a pound of beef, 1 egg, a 1/3 cup of oatmeal. I have a tablespoon of steak seasoning, just all-purpose steak seasoning. It's what I had in my cupboard. It's got a mix of salt and pepper, of course. It's got some fennel in there. It has garlic, dried garlic, some dried onion. So it's a very rounded mix of spices when you get a steak seasoning. And so I like to use that in my family recipe. And for a little added flavor, I've always put some Worcestershire sauce. So 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. 2 tablespoons would be the full version, right into the mix. So again, I've got the ground beef, I've got the egg, I've got the oats, a few spices, and the Worcestershire sauce. So let's give this one a mix. So from a texture standpoint, this one is right in the middle of the other two. And it's going to be a little bit looser because the oats haven't had a chance to expand. And so this is going to feel a little more wet than the other 2 versions. And we'll see in the end which one looks better, comes out better. I'll give it a taste test. Maybe you'd like to try this too. I think all 3 versions are excellent. This one reminds me of Grown Up. Okay, my 3rd loaf pan. And you can see this is much less from a volume standpoint in this loaf pan. That is because this one's 3/4 of a pound of ground beef as opposed to 1 pound in the other 2 versions. So here's my 3 meatloaves ready to go. I've got the classic meatloaf with fresh breadcrumbs. I have the stovetop stuffing viral meatloaf. And I have my own family recipe using oatmeal. Now from a baking standpoint, each of these meatloaves carry a different way to be cooked in the oven. So for the classic meatloaf, the recipe that I have multiple recipes, honestly, say that you just use the loaf pan as a form. And so I've just turned that out right onto this pan that I'm going to pop in the oven. For the viral version, and I probably shouldn't have put it in the loaf pan to begin with, but basically it says to form it on your tray as opposed to putting it in a loaf pan. So you would just, after you mix it with your hands, you would just put it on the tray and form it into a loaf shape. So I'll try to, I don't know, make it a little less defined. You can see that the classic meatloaf is very defined by the mold that it was in, and I've flattened this one out a little bit. Now, my family recipe cooks right inside of the loaf pan. So into the oven, inside the loaf pan, that will go. I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. I've started my potatoes for the mashed potatoes that will accompany the meatloaf for dinner. So now it's just time to put these in the oven. So in the oven for 35 minutes at 350 degrees. Because these are smaller, they'll cook faster. I want to check them at 35 minutes. They may need to go a little bit longer, but I'll check the internal temp at the 35-minute mark, and that'll let me know how much longer they need to stay in for. A full loaf would be maybe 60 minutes, maybe a little longer than that. I'm expecting 45 minutes on these, but again, we'll check them at 35. Now my meatloaves have been in the oven for about 35 minutes, so I'm going to give it a look. I think they're looking pretty good. I think the small one is probably pretty close. Test some temperatures here. Definitely ready. I think these have just a bit more time left to go. That one's ready. This one's interesting. This is the classic, and it's not quite up to temp. It is up to temp. Okay, so now my meatloaves are done, but now let's talk about the glaze. There's two traditional types of glaze that are used. Well, probably more than two, but these are the main two. The first one is what we use in my family recipe and also is used on the viral recipe, and that's just straight ketchup. So I'm just going to add a healthy dose of ketchup right on top of each of these two meatloaves. And back in the oven that will go to give it a chance to glaze. And this one goes on the stovetop stuffing version. Again, this is just straight ketchup. When you think about meatloaf, you think about that ground beef sliced with that top layer of red glaze on top. That's what we're doing right here. That's what this is about. A little bit more on this guy. So we've got plenty. Now, as you can see, using the loaf pan, it limits your surface area to apply the glaze. You can apply it all the way around when you're not using a loaf pan, which is a better look aesthetically, I think. Now the other version is a sweeter glaze, and this is a more traditional glaze. This is ketchup, again, with brown sugar and some dry mustard. It's going to be a little bit sweeter. That brown sugar will help it caramelize a little easier in the oven, maybe. We'll see once it's had a chance to bake and glaze. Now I could have added this much earlier in the process. Could have been, you know, maybe even at the beginning of the bake if you really wanted it dark and caramelized. And again, just making sure that I get all the surface area coated here. I want to make sure that I've got a healthy amount of glaze on top. That looks delicious. I have to tell you, my apartment smells like growing up. I mean, this smells like family dinner to me. Okay, back into the oven. I've still got it set at 350 for about 10 minutes. Meanwhile, my mashed potatoes have finished cooking. I've got those ready to go. They're set on warm back here. I'm also going to make a brown gravy, just a packet brown gravy, to drizzle on top of the potatoes and to dip that meatloaf in if you really want to. Now my meatloaves have been in the oven for almost 10 minutes. The timer is just about ready to go off. I have my gravy ready to go. I have my potatoes ready to go. Then it's just a matter of letting the meatloaves rest a little bit and then slicing in. And that timer says 10 minutes, so let's pull these out and take a look. Now I'm not sure about you, but to me, this says meatloaf dinner. Now again, we've got classic meatloaf with fresh breadcrumbs. We have the stovetop stuffing version, which is the viral meatloaf with stovetop stuffing mix as the filler. And my traditional, or my family recipe, traditional to my family, meatloaf with oats as the filler. So we're going to give this about 10 minutes to set up and then slice into it and enjoy. All right, I think it's time. Let's dive into these three versions of classic meatloaf. Classic, fresh breadcrumbs, stovetop stuffing viral, and my own family recipe with oats. Now I can tell you by slicing into each of these that this one is definitely looser as far as the density, and that has probably a lot to do with the fact that it was fresh breadcrumbs going into it. These two have a lot more density. Again, dry breadcrumbs being the stovetop stuffing mix in this one and oats in this one. But now let's pull these out to a plate so you can see the difference. Start with the traditional since it's closer to me. And then to the stovetop. Make sure I get all the way down to the bottom there. Hold it together. Ooh. And the classic. I'll turn these slices out just so you can take a look at the inside here. You can probably tell pretty easily the moisture inside of this one is very evident. This one appears to be a little bit dry, and so does this one. But let's give each of these a taste and understand how the flavor is. I'm going to start with the classic meatloaf, fresh breadcrumbs. You know, it's a subtle flavor, it's nuanced. It doesn't have that over-the-top meatloaf flavor. It's just rounded. It is moist. The fresh ingredients, the onion, you can taste the onion. Let me try some with the glaze on it. Ooh, cross-pollinating. The sweetness of the glaze makes it feel like a classic meatloaf. I would give this, boy, I'll tell you, a 9 out of 10. Classic meatloaf is classic for a reason. Let's move to the stovetop stuffing version. Again, this is a little more dry. That's not to say it's going to be dry when we eat it. That's a little more, I'll say the flavoring on this tastes like stuffing. I mean, it's the flavoring of stuffing, obviously, inside of this. It is a little more dry. The moisture was absorbed a little bit more so with that dry stuffing mix, and so that would make sense to me. It's good, there's no question. This would be a good meatloaf to serve with gravy. And of course the ketchup glaze, it's what I'm comfortable with, it's what I'm familiar with, it's what I had growing up, so that feels familiar to me. Now let's move to the oatmeal. Now this is a smaller loaf. It cooked a little faster, so it's probably a little bit drier for that reason. The Worcestershire sauce in there, that tastes like the meatloaf I know. Now let's find some with the glaze. That's my family meatloaf right there. Makes sense since I made my family meatloaf right there. So meatloaf prepared 3 different ways. I got to tell you, I was a little bit surprised. I was expecting by far and away that my family recipe would end up on top in my mind because it's so familiar to me and it's delicious. If you haven't tried this version, please do, because it really does have a great flavor. The oats and the Worcestershire sauce and the other spices that I put into it, it's delicious. The stovetop stuffing version, I would say it's number 3 on my list, and only because it's a little bit drier. It doesn't taste as nuanced. It's a little bit more harsh because it came out of a box probably, but the flavor's spot on, and it would serve very well to have with some gravy, just like I have here on my counter, and I probably will have it that way when I serve it for myself for dinner. But I guess the shocker for me, or the surprise of the day, is this classic meatloaf, and there's a reason why it's been on family tables for 150 years or longer. This is really delicious. This has nuanced flavor, it's well-rounded, it's moist on the inside, and that sweet glaze on top, just a hint of sweetness, even more so than just straight ketchup. It marries very well together, and this is my number 1 choice. So thanks for joining me today on Dad's Diner and the Fab Feral 5 Kitchen, and until we meet again, order up!